Hello again, and we are now in chapter 16, which is the last chapter of the book, and it describes several other biologically inspired techniques that some of them are related to the genetic algorithms in this way or another. And we are going to quickly go over them. We will start with genetic programming. Genetic programming is actually a specialized type of a genetic algorithm that tries to write programs or functions that combines together different operations to give us what we want. These programs or functions are described as a tree. So the structure that the gene or the chromosome is actually something that represents a tree that has leaves with the inputs and some constant values, and then has a set of operations that can be used as nodes in the tree. Some of them are unary operations like the cosine, and some of them are accepting two parameters or more. When we go to do the crossover operation, what we do with trees is we try to take a chunk of each tree, each parent, and swap it around. That's one way to do it. There are all kind of ways to ensure that it doesn't break the structure of the tree, that it's valid, and there is a lot more that can go into that, but we're going to look at a simple tree that tries to solve what we call the even parity, where we have three inputs, and whenever two of them or none of them is 1, then we get 1 at the end. And this can be implemented with logical gates. The simplest way that we can implement it is with two XOR gates, that as shown here. But it can also be described with the AND, OR, and NOT logical gates, and all kind of combinations of them. So we will try to compose a program that uses all these operations and these three inputs to implement that even parity according to a truth table that tells you what should be the outputs for a particular input. So if we look at the program, it's very similar to other deep programs. Deep is what we use also for genetic programming, and you can see here the GP. And here you define the operators and the primitives, etc. They're called, and you can see the logical operations here, and the only values that come in as external values are zeros and ones. And you can read more about it in the book. But this program is going to try to implement something that will give us the correct function, because the cost that we are minimizing is the error in parity. And so every combination of inputs that doesn't give us the output that we want is going to cost us, and we try to minimize it to 0, and then we will get the correct output for all the combinations of the inputs. If we run this, it doesn't take very long, and it creates that expression that you see down here, and we draw it as a graph. And what we see here is this is the red node here is the output. This is the first XOR that we see here. So this is where everything gets into, and the output would come out of here. So it will be XOR of this, and this will be AND of this and this, etc. And the same inputs can be several times as leaves. So it works. It gives us 0 error. It also tells us that the length is 19 and the height is 4. These are parameters of the tree, and the fitness is 0, which is what we wanted. It means that all the combinations are coming out correct. So it solved the problem, but we feel that it is perhaps too complex. We can probably do something a lot simpler. We know that we can do it with 2 XOR gates, and here we have a bunch of gates. So to help the situation, we are looking at the second one that's called reduced. Let's see the difference between them quickly. And we can see that the only difference really is that we added to the cost the complexity. So we added the height of the tree divided by 100 to the cost of the tree. So this will encourage the tree to be less complex, because the more complex the tree is, the more the cost is, and we are minimizing the cost. So with this difference, if we run the second program, it runs even faster. And now what we see is a lot simpler indeed. We have this XOR that accepts this input and XOR of the other two inputs, which is really exactly what we see here. So we were able to achieve the simplest structure possible just by adding that constraint, if you want to call it that way. We added that extra cost for the complexity. So we are continuing to the next technique that I wanted to cover, which is called neuroevolution of augmenting topologies, or NEAT, N-E-A-T. And it's a very specialized kind of genetic algorithm that grows neural networks that solve a particular problem. In many cases, these are reinforcement learning problems like playing games. But you can solve different problems with it because neural networks are very versatile. They basically have an input and an output, and you can implement the mapping that you want. So we have a nice demo that solved the same problem as before, the even parity that we were using the genetic programming to solve. We're going to use the third program, and it uses a library that has a very nice visual, and you will see that as I run. And trying to basically create a neural network that will give us an implementation of that even parity function, that we know what the output should be for different inputs, all the combinations that we have. So if we run that, we will actually see a nice visual of it running. As it's running, we can see the inputs and the output. We can see the exact value on the picture, but we can see them running at the bottom. And what we can see on the top is actually an interesting aspect of NEAT. And let me open it. It saves here a snapshot of the very end of it. So let's look at that. So first, these are the three inputs. We have three inputs and one output. And the top node here actually represents a bias that is being fed to all the nodes that are not the inputs. Bias is, or threshold is something that neural networks need other than the weights of the connections that are coming in. Increase that a little bit. The blue lines are positive, they represent positive weights. The orangey lines, negative weights. The actual weights are mentioned here as we run through the evolution. And all the biases come from that node, so the value of the bias is by the weight that they put on the probably -1 that comes from here. So what we have at the end, it starts with the minimal configuration, which is one node, and then grows it, but all it ended up is with two nodes in the hidden layer, which is, as far as we know, this is the minimum way to implement a neural network that gives us that functionality. We can also see that the NEAT allows the inputs go directly to the output. You can skip layers if you want. And at the end of it, we can see here the truth table, all the combinations and the values that they yield at the end, which means gives us actually the perfect truth table that we wanted. What I started mentioning before, and you see it in the picture, are those colors at the top. The way one of the things that are special about the genetic algorithm that drives this is that it divides the population to subspecies, meaning there are groups of individuals that are sort of similar enough to each other that the crossover operations will be kept particularly within those groups. So if you take, the idea is if you take individuals that are very different from each other and you try to crisscross them, then you will get something invalid or something that doesn't perform very well. So as it was running, you could see how those subspecies evolve at the same time, and this is how it looked at the end. So the last program I'm going to show you, the last program in the entire book actually, is the particle swarm optimization with the Himmelblau function. So the particle swarm optimization is a way to represent the behavior of, for example, a flock of birds or a school of fish, that there are many individuals, but somehow they behave like a group. They sort of have information and they are synchronized to some degree, which is what we see in this video. We must have seen this in real life. And the way this is implemented as an algorithm is usually to find a minimum or maximum of a function, sort of like the same that we do in genetic algorithms, but a little bit different way. So we're just going back to the Himmelblau function that we've seen before, and when we were finding the minimum points, the minima with the genetic algorithm. This time we'll try to find one of them, whatever one, it doesn't matter, using this algorithm, which we call the PSO, particle swarm optimization. So the idea is that we have a population of solutions, but rather than generation, they sort of have generations, but they actually don't really combine with each other or mutate. What they do is they have a location, and their location gets updated. Each and every one of them. There are many iterations. Instead of a generation, we have an iteration, and in each iteration, we take each one of these, what we call particles, one of these individuals that has a particular location, and we update the location while calculating 3 different forces that affect it. So this is a visualization of that. So if this is the particle which is in a particular location, the inertia, that vector which has a direction and a size, shows that direction that it was going and the speed that it was going in this direction. But to this we add the cognitive force, which means it remembers where is the best place that it's been so far, best meaning the minimum that it could find so far if we're looking for minimum. But it also knows, because we can calculate it and we can put it in software in memory and it can find out. We don't really know how the birds know, but this particle knows what is the best that was found by the entire group. It has access to this knowledge of the entire group, so it knows also what is the best that was found, even if it was found by another particle and not by the same particle. So it knows that. This is called the social force. So at any update, we take this particle, we take the inertia, we take the cognitive force and the social force, and we combine them together like 3 vectors. So you can see here a visualization of that. So we start at the same spot, and then we take 1 vector, 2nd vector, 3rd vector, and the result of all this is a new vector that is the green vector here, that it will be the current speed and direction that it was going to go, which is quite a bit different than where it was going before. So you see it was going this way, now it will be going like this way. So we do this every time, every iteration, and that means that these particles are all moving around all the time. They never really stop, but they will eventually go through the minimum points, or at least one of them. And when we run the program, this particular program, you will see that it runs quickly, relatively quickly, once it starts running, and that's it, and it finished running. And it did find one of the known locations of the minima, and you see it's very close to 0. But you see that when it ended, it wasn't at that point, because it keeps moving around all the time. So if we search, we will see that around that this is where it found the best location, but it keeps looking and keeps looking. We just stop it at some point and see what was the best so far. This always represents the best of everyone in the population. Each one of the particles, this will be the the best of them. So we remember it, or the algorithm remembers it. It then at the end, when we stop at some point, it will give you the best particle and the best location and the best fitness that was found for it. And this is how this algorithm works. So this was the last chapter with programs. I hope you enjoy it. I encourage you to modify, to try out new things, to let your imagination drive you, and explore. There is a lot to explore in genetic algorithms and in more generally in biologically inspired algorithms. And I hope to hear from you, and I hope to keep in touch with all of you. Have fun.